Sten, we're live.
WooSox. Thank you, Larry Liberty Guy. All right, so, I don't talk a lot about my baseball background, but we'll kind of touch upon that a little bit today, but I'll explain why in a minute. But we're going full baseball gear today with the jersey, with the cap. I got my Red Sox American League Championship ring there, and I even showing you for the first time ever on this show my Mike Stenhouse autograph engraved baseball bat. This is an actual bat I used when I played for the Red Sox in 1986. I know it was that year because of that style of bat, M259. I only used that bat in with the Red Sox when I was relegated to a very rare and occasional bench player, a little smaller, a little lighter than I used to use when I played every day, and that's what you have to do when you're sort of a part-time player. But for those of you who don't know, I don't talk about it a lot, but I had a Major League Baseball career with the Montreal Expos, the Minnesota Twins, and the Boston Red Sox. I was lucky enough to be on the Red Sox in 1986 with Bill Buckner and Roger Clemens, God rest Buckner's soul, and many others, Dwight Evans and Wade Boggs, and all those guys, Marty Barrett. We won the American League Championship. Now, when I say we, I was on the team, for a portion of that season, but I was not on the postseason roster. So I was watching those exciting and then ultimately disappointing playoff and World Series games at home, just like you are. But what you may not also know is that for 12 years, from 1988, the year after I retired as a player, for 12 years to 1999, I was a color commentator for Pawtucket Red Sox games on the New England Sports Network. So, as a former, and that year in '86, I split the season between Boston and Pawtucket. So today, later on in our show, in about 20 minutes from now, we're going to have a senior vice president of the Worcester Red Sox. I'm still devastated that we don't have the Pawtucket Red Sox. But anyway, Rhode Islanders have interest in what goes on up there, I think. Some of those of us who are baseball fans. And we'll talk about their new stadium, their new franchise, and a little bit maybe about their exciting come-from-behind victory yesterday. But it's more about the stadium and what they're doing up there with the team. And we'll try to ask what happened to Paws and Mrs. Paws, the mascots of Pawtucket Red Sox. I'll probably have to Rob Crane will probably make me take this hat off once we start. The big news on today's show, and literally breaking news, will be an interview coming up in about 35 minutes with Ken Block. Ken Block, as you know, former gubernatorial candidate, former head of the moderate party, of the former moderate party of Rhode Island, now runs a group called Watchdog RI. And pretty much his sole focus, well, I don't know if that's fair, but certainly one of his primary focuses is exposing abuses in government unions, collective bargaining agreements, wasteful practices. And boy, has he found a big one now. When you hear the story, you will be outraged. Listen, we all love our first responders. But this story about overtime abuse with Warwick firefighters and probably with firefighters in your city or town is unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Ken was working with the Hummel Report, who did some investigating as well, and there's been 2 stories, a front page article in Sunday's Providence Journal, a follow-up story just released hours ago by the Hummel Report, and we're going to talk with Ken about that. It's absolutely alarming and disgusting. Our first guest, in just about 5 minutes from now, will be from Advantage Inc. You probably don't know of them, but they're an out-of-state polling firm, and they did some polling on the TCI Gas Tax. What do Rhode Islanders think of this supposed gas tax in exchange for supposed environmental benefits? We're going to talk to Jim Eltringham on that in just a few minutes. But I'm going to start with just a little commentary for 5 minutes on something I didn't get to yesterday. I mean, it's commentary spurred by Eric Erickson. He's kind of a syndicated national commentator. And we all know with this socialist push, this woke push, that's just dominating our federal government now, has been dominating our state government for years and ruining our state. It's why we're last in business climate, and it's why so many people are disgusted in leaving the state. I'm gonna take some of his comments and add a little personal spin to it. But this whole phenomenon of wokeness, the seeming rapid fire in which it's taken hold in the culture, in the pop culture, and then ultimately in our government has absolutely been amazing to me. I don't know how such fringe and radical ideas become implemented so quickly, and I don't think with a majority, support from the people. There's so many people criticize Donald Trump supporters for just blindly following the leader, but I'll tell you what, there's nothing. You talk about the mice following the Pied Piper. There's nothing like progressive leftists who follow their woke masters and just automatically repeat the mantras they put out without any thought, without any independent thinking, without any critical thinking. It's one thing to say about critical race theory. Critical race theory or critical thinking? What's more important? I think critical thinking is more important. And this is what, and the woke movement, you've seen me, I'm going to show you this image here. You've seen me show you this before. This is what woke means to me. Woke means that you are blind to the realities of the world. It's supposed to mean that you're awakened to these oppressive realities of the world, but it means but those oppressive realities are myth. You only see what your woke masters tell you, and you ignore everything else. You have blinders on. And if you're on a college campus, it's even worse. If you're a recent college graduate of one of these woke universities, it's even worse. And to me, wokeness is being closed-minded, not open-minded, not awakened to anything new. I mean, what we're creating and seeing today in society is a bunch of people whose minds are so open, and according to Eric, their brains have literally fallen out. There's no critical thinking left. We just follow whatever our woke masters tell us to do and say whatever they say, and we don't put any thought into it. All we can do is repeat talking points without knowing what the hell we're saying. You can be so open-minded, so woke, that you turn off your brain. We get criticized for not following the science, but it's they who believe things like, if I take some hormones and have some surgery, an XY male can become an XX female. It's not scientifically possible. But yet, they want us to believe it. They want us to believe the new one. You're going to probably hear more about this with the cows and the Green New Deal and the flatulence from cows, that to save the world, we have to eat less beef, 4 pounds a year per person. That's it, 4 pounds a year per person. That's a quarter pounder a month, basically. A quarter pounder a month, a month or so. And eat more insects, right? They want you to believe that that's good, and you're going to hear people blindly repeating that. And you know what? The woke crowd will blindly go along with that and try to convince the rest of us that it's the right thing to do. And with the media's help, maybe a lot of us will be convinced to think that it's the right thing to do. I mean, the ability for these people to turn on a dime and to abandon all their core principles is amazing to me. And one of the amazing woke issues is climate change. Now, that's been going on for more than now. So let's bring on our first guest from Advantage Inc., a polling firm, Jim Eltringham. Jim, if you're there, unmute yourself and turn your video on, and I know he's in the house, and he's on in the stadium. There's Jim. How you doing, Jim?
Hey, not too bad, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, welcome into the dugout. So I see you playing right along, and you got a cap on. What cap you got for me today?
This is the Charleston River Dogs from Charleston, South Carolina. I got your note about the caps. I'm a Yankee fan, and I was not going to step in that. So the River Dogs.
It would have been great contrast to my Red Sox gear today.
Well, I used to go see the Pollster at Scranton.
Yes.
Back when they were a Phillies farm team. I was born in Scranton, but my father-in-law lives in Charleston, South Carolina, and every once in a while I go down there. I get to take in a minor league game. I took my twin daughters there to their first game, and in their first game back, 4 or 5 years ago, playing second base for the Greenville Drive, Mookie Betts. So it was pretty cool. Who knew at the time that he was going to be the best player in baseball?
Yeah, I know. Well, thanks for being sensitive and not wearing your Yankees gear, because I might have had to bop you over the head with my bat here. So.
Yeah, see, that's what I was worried about.
Yeah, I knew you were. So that shows you what kind of sensitive guy you are. Now, we commissioned your firm towards the end of last year, after the election, to poll Rhode Island, because we knew this TCI gas tax was coming, to poll Rhode Islanders to see how they felt, whether they were buying the line that we're going to charge you extra money at the gas pump in exchange for environmental benefits. And you conducted a poll. Tell us, first of all, about the structure of the poll, scientifically, margin error, all that stuff, and then tell us what the top line results were, Jim.
Sure, and it was pretty basic. We asked just a handful of questions and tried to match up the demographics based on the electorate of the state.
While you're talking, by the way, I'm just going to share our screen with our viewers so they can see that we posted this poll last year. But go ahead, keep going, Jim.
Sure. So we tried to keep it pretty close to what we expect the electorate of a typical Rhode Island turnout to be. And we had a margin of error of 4.5%, a little bit less than 4.5%, polled 500 voters statewide. And we saw something there that is pretty consistent with what we see whenever we poll TCI. We polled it in a number of states. In addition to Rhode Island, we polled it in Massachusetts, and we polled it in Vermont. And, we see something, and you mentioned, climate change being something that's, out there that everyone talks about. And we do see that people want to do something about climate change. They look at what's going on out there. They say, okay, we hear all these messages. We're interested in hearing solutions. And then when we bring up TCI and we talk about some of the impacts that TCI would have on, actually, I'll say we have two basic impacts. One is the impact that people will have on their pocketbook, on their personal stuff, family budgets. Right, and folks don't like that. And then they also look at the impact that TCI would have on efforts to reduce climate emissions, and it's not a very impactful policy. And so people look at it and say, okay, so it's going to cost a lot, and it's not going to be very effective. And you see the support, whatever support it has, starts dropping like a stone.
So would it be fair to summarize first, and excuse me, just we'll go a little back and forth here, that you found people were initially open to the concept of paying a little more at the pump in exchange for saving the world, right, kind of thing. But once they learned the high costs on the one side and the lack of emissions cuts on the other side, or environmental benefit, then their attitudes change a little, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, Mike, and you know that the Center for Freedom and Prosperity did a study on this, and showed that within 5 years, you're talking about Rhode Island losing 2,000 jobs to this, and you're talking about disposable income for an average family going back down by $1,200. and you put those real numbers in front of people, and they say, well, there has to be a better way to do that. It shouldn't be a trade-off of, am I able to get to work? Am I able to meet my family budget, or do I save the world? That's a ludicrous choice, and people kind of see through that.
All right, so let's look at those first higher level numbers.
Sure.
On the screen here and from our poll. So at first, 42% of voters strongly or somewhat supported the general concept of TCI. Is that accurate to say, as we can see right here?
Yeah, and you might see some public polling that puts that number differently. I think a lot of that depends on how you ask the question. But when our first question on this was pretty straight up, was pretty I would say I wouldn't say completely unbiased, but as even as you could get. Everything's going to have a little bit of a tilt one way or another. But talks about what TCI policy is, which is raising the cost of fuel.
Conceptually, right?
I'm sorry?
Conceptually, right?
Yeah, conceptually, it's raising the cost of fuel in order to pay for, to reduce carbon emissions and pay for, climate mitigating policies. But, and people generally say, okay, I understand that. If we want to pay for these policies, the money has to come from somewhere.
That support plummeted once they learned of the cost versus benefit lack of value proposition, right?
That's right. And we saw, the second question we asked was about the impact, and talking about how if you look at current policies would reduce carbon emissions by 19% over the next 10 years. That's probably something a lot of voters, a lot of respondents don't know, because when you hear about climate science, all you hear about is the doom and the gloom. You don't hear that, okay, there's progress being made. Carbon emissions would reduce by a fifth if we do nothing else. And then you're talking about adding 1 to 6% with TCI. And then we also mentioned, by the way, this is something that's going to cost the economy $7 billion over that time. And that's,
so that's really what precipitated that loss of support, right?
Yeah, that's where you start seeing that loss of support right there in the second question. And then it goes further when you start talking about the personal impact that people have, the loss of family income, the loss of jobs that you're going to have.
And the overall economy, yeah.
Yeah, and then we can go into it later, but people also understand that impact is not going to be even. It's not going to be felt by everybody equally. It's really a kind of a regressive policy when you start peeling it back.
All right, so let's look at these little groups we've highlighted here. So even Democrats had a substantial, they lost about a third of their support once they learned the pros and cons, right?
Right.
Independents, opposition rose 10 points among independents, and support among young voters fell by about a third as well. So pretty much all demographic groups are reacting. Once the concept gets explained in fact, the support is dropping.
Yeah, and it's funny because you have this concept in your mind, and many people have this concept in their mind of saying, okay, well, we've got, younger people are more environmentally focused, they're more green, but younger people also are looking at having the next 40 or 50 years of their life ahead of them, raising a family, moving through a career, buying a house, keeping a house, buying their second house. And all those things are right there ahead of them. And when you think about it that way, it makes sense that younger voters would see that same decline. We actually see, it's a cuts across everywhere, but if there's any place where the decline is less steep, it's with older voters who maybe don't, are thinking more about, what does the world look like when I'm gone, and not thinking about, okay, I'm going to have to worry about 30 or 40 or 50 years of expenses ahead of me.
All right. Now, beyond the economic impact, beyond the pocketbook impact that you talked about, our viewers might have seen we just had a stat, 48% feel of the people you polled that TCI will disproportionately affect commuters and low-income families. Clearly, a gas tax is a regressive tax. Once that's explained to voters, that this is going to hurt low-income families relatively more than anyone else, that was also a big concern you found.
That's right. And it makes sense when you look at the last year plus of our collective existence, as you had people staying at home and working from home and avoiding going into offices. The people who could do that were white collar workers, people with office jobs. The people who could not do that were more blue collar workers, essential workers, and those are the folks that we ask them to be where they're at or in their place of work because they're so important. And those are the people who have to travel back and forth.
Right.
And even with the reduced traffic, they're still spending money on gas.
Right. And you're gonna drive regardless.
That's right.
And it's just gonna means less money to spend somewhere else on food or medical care or whatever. All right, two more quick questions I want to cover with you, Jim, and thanks for your time. First, so politically, based on what you've seen, if the TCI gas tax were to become an issue in the 2022 state legislative races or state governor races, this governor appears to be supporting TCI. He just wants the money, apparently, from what we've heard, that this might generate. What is your advice to someone who's looking at potential political? Is this gonna, and what have you, and I know you do political work in other states, what is your message to Rhode Island lawmakers when it comes to how the public will ultimately react to this?
Well, this is a great day to ask this because I was driving to work today myself, and I was passing by gas stations that were either closed or had, hoods.
Where are you? Where are you?
Down in Virginia.
You're in Virginia.
Down in Virginia, and where you see with the recent issue with the cyber attack on the pipeline, where the supply chain can be upset. You can see a 25%, 50-cent spike in gas. That's something that affects everything. And people understand that it affects everything. And they understand that it's regressive in terms of getting to work and back. They understand that it's going to make the groceries that have to be shipped to their grocery store more expensive. And if you're the person who's making all that stuff more expensive and you're hitting the pocketbook, you are hitting a very, very personal pressure point.
And do you think that pressure point is enough that it could sway somebody's vote? You've done both polling work and political work, and I'm trying to put the two together. Does this poll indicate to you that TCI, if it becomes an issue, could be either a political advantage or a political liability?
Oh, I think supporting TCI would be a political liability. If you're talking about stuff becoming more expensive and you're the candidate who's pushing that, and there's an effective candidate on the other side bringing that up and making sure that people understand that it's your policy that's making the bread more expensive, the gas more expensive, the milk more expensive, and taking $1,200 out of the average family's wallet, then you're in real big trouble.
Now, I know last question for you, Jim. I know you've conducted similar polls in other states. So how is what you found in Rhode Island different than what you might have found in other states? And if you can name those states, that would be great. Are you finding that Rhode Islanders are more accepting? Rhode Island is a very blue state, very progressive state, population, so it's said. Are you finding that in when you compare this Rhode Island poll to what you've done in other states?
We've polled like in in addition to Rhode Island, we've polled in Massachusetts, we've polled in Vermont on this issue. And, both of those are states that you would not exactly call bastions of conservative thought.
Right.
But we see a very consistent drop off in the pattern of support. When we talk about it in general terms, and we talk about it in a lot of different types of general terms, and sometimes that means the support, that initial support. I think we had 42% in your poll. Sometimes that support is higher, sometimes it's lower. A lot of it depends on how the question's asked. But conceptually, when you talk about raising fuel prices to mitigate environmental impact, there's general support for that. But then when you start talking about the way it's going to affect a family in that state, whether it's an increased gas tax, whether it's the loss of household income, whether that's lost jobs in that state, whatever that impact is, when voters start seeing that environmental impact, all of a sudden the juice doesn't become worth the squeeze anymore, and it becomes a real problem, politically. And when we see that across the board, and we don't.
But again, would you say we're in line with those other states, or more accepting or less accepting of this TCI concept in other states?
No, I think it's pretty I wouldn't say more or less. I'd say it's pretty universal that we see numbers decline when you start talking about those impacts. And it's because really, when you get down to it, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, independent, liberal, conservative, whatever, you've got bills at the end of the month. You've got a gas tank you may need to fill up, depending on where you live. If you don't live in a walkable or public transit oriented urban area, you've got kids that need to get to school and need to get fed.
Yep.
You've got household grocery bills. That's universal.
Into your budget. Yep. All right, Jim Eltringham, thanks. We published the poll last year, but we waited until the actual legislation was filed, which it was last week, to bring you back on to explain the poll. So thanks for coming on, and I'll look forward to working with you again in the future. Jim Eltringham, Advantage Inc. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right. Okay, we had planned to have up next our guest from the Worcester Red Sox, but I'm not seeing that Rob Crane has entered the room. Our guest after that is Ken Block. I can see now. Who knows if they have a game tonight up in Worcester. So on a home day, he might have got. So if we start with Ken, we're going to get into a pretty good discussion. Larry Liberty guy, I'm a little lost for how to proceed here. Let's bring Ken on. Ken, let's bring Ken into the show, because I just don't know if they're having some kind of, it's only their second game up there in Polar Park in Worcester, and our guest might be having a problem. So let's talk to Ken, who I can see is connecting right now. The Worcester Red Sox did win their home opener yesterday afternoon. I believe the score was 8-5. They were down by 3 or 4 runs early in the game, and they came back. So a nice come-from-behind victory, as you'll hear from the guest, hopefully soon when we talk to him. And Ken, if you're there, unmute yourself. There it is. All right, so Ken, our guest prior to you hasn't signed on yet. I see you're in the dugout with a cap. What cap do you have for us today?
So this is a Dartmouth cap.
As in Dartmouth College?
Dartmouth College, correct, yes.
Wow, the Big Green.
Big Green, yes.
You have a connection there?
That's where I went.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yep.
I didn't even know that. So, man, no wonder why you and I are rivals. A Harvard guy against a Dartmouth guy.
Oh, big time. He went to the daycare, I went to the real school.
Okay, love it. Dartmouth, I used to love the football bonfires up there. We went up for when Harvard played, and that was the biggest bonfire I ever went to, man. They had built some, had to be 3 or 4 stories high thing.
Yeah, railroad ties, and they put the number of ties up for your class year. So the year I was there was 87 tiers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. I didn't know the backstory there. All right, listen, let me ask your indulgence. I'd like to get started. I don't know that our guest will join in. If he does, I know he's very busy. Would you mind if we put you on hold, then came back? I only need to spend 5 or 10 minutes with him, but since you're here, he may not even call in Rock Brain. All right, so Ken Block, you've been uncovering some interesting stuff. And you're working with the Hummel Report on this. Let's say that right up front. Great work, investigative journalism. You had a front page story in the Providence Journal on Sunday. And Hummel Report put out new information too that I saw right before the show started, was already starting to get a lot of attention on social media. What is going on with overtime abuse with Warwick firefighters?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, Hummel had got a nice set of data from Warwick, different things to do with the fire department, and Watchdog Rhode Island was able to take that data, bring it into our systems, and take a look at a lot of different sets of the data. And one of the more interesting ones was what they call accountability sheets, and this tells you who was scheduled to work what shift, who actually worked the shift, who took a sick day, who took a vacation day, and who made overtime. And we were able to take that data and take a look over the course of calendar year 2020. And one of the things that we were able to pull out of our analysis was that Warwick spent about $500,000 in extra pay for overtime for firefighters who didn't work the regular number of hours that they're supposed to work every week, like you and I would understand. So to make this simple for everybody listening at home, you have a 40-hour-a-week job. You can't start making overtime until you actually work your 40 hours.
But in your first 40 hours on the job, right?
That's right. In Warwick, they had firefighters taking all of their regular shifts off using sick time, so they didn't work a minute of regular time, but then they worked 80 hours of overtime that week. So
at time and a half.
At time and a half, so that's pretty scandalous. And everybody who works
clearly rigging the system, right? Clearly, purposely designed to rip off taxpayers and enrich themselves, right?
Right. Now, interestingly, what they were doing, it turns out, is not illegal.
Now let's get into that in a second.
Sure.
All right, but first let's talk more about the scam.
Yeah.
So you found this happen in Warwick.
Correct. And previous to the work that we did this year in Warwick, we did a similar analysis of the East Greenwich Fire Department in 2018, and we found even worse overtime abuse than what we found in Warwick. Same idea, where firefighters were hauling in massive amounts of overtime without working their regular shifts. It was just far greater numbers and with much greater frequency in East Greenwich.
So to the worker out there, just imagine you take your personal time, whether that's vacation or sick time or whatever it is. You don't work that week, or for most of that week, and then you put in some time later in the week, and all that gets paid to you at time and a half overtime rate. So how much did it cost the city of Warwick in the 1 year you looked at? This was 2020?
Correct, calendar year 2020. So when we looked at the shifts where a firefighter worked less than, now it's a little bit weird, they work 48-hour weeks over the course of 8 days. Okay? That's the definition of a week in the Warwick firefighter contract. So when we looked at these 8-day weeks for every firefighter, we looked to see what weeks a firefighter worked fewer than 48 hours, but also logged overtime hours. Okay? And what we found was that there were 1,200 something weeks that were worked where less than 48 hours was worked and some overtime was worked. Then what we did was we were able to calculate how many hours should have been run at straight time as opposed to time and a half to get the firefighter up to 48. And then we took the half piece of time and a half to calculate what the cost was to the city of Warwick, and that cost was over $500,000.
$500,000
Yep.
in 1 year.
1 year.
Now, would you say, do you know how many firefighters are there in Warwick, and how many of them took part in this scam?
There's 180 firefighters in Warwick. I couldn't tell you how many did, but given 1,200 shifts worked, a lot of them participated.
And any one firefighter could earn how much extra in money they probably shouldn't have earned? Tens of thousands of dollars?
Tens of thousands of dollars in the worst case. Warwick, there was a story in Warwick that Hummel did about a month ago that documented that the top wage earner in the fire department in fiscal year, I think 2020, he hauled in $319,000. Over $200,000 of that was in overtime.
Wait a minute, say that again. One firefighter earned over $300,000 in a year.
In Warwick, yes.
And over 200 of that was overtime, presumably much of this scam overtime.
Probably the scam wasn't the vast majority of it.
All right.
In fact, it probably wasn't even half. It was probably under that.
All right.
Remember, Warwick had about $6 million in overtime for the fire department last year. And this scam only netted about $500,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, so
real money.
Yeah, to circle back where you were, just by way of background, this all starts, you mentioned earlier, this all starts with some good handiwork you did in East Greenwich a few years ago, uncovering some disturbing overtime abuse there. And if our viewers recall, there was a big controversy a few years ago about this firefighter overtime bill, about whether that was going to be 58 hours, just because of the way the shifts are. That's very goofy the way the shifts are on. You're on 24 hours, you're off 24, you're on 48. It's very hard to calculate a week. But anyway, municipalities were trying to restructure the way that hours were calculated just to try to make it more fair and to save some money. Well, the firefighters weren't going to have any of that, so they changed the overtime law to make sure that firefighters had every advantage. But they slid something into the end of that bill, didn't they? And who slid it in? Okay.
Tiverton Representative John Edwards, who's in leadership in the House, submitted the bill in question. And the very last sentence of that bill made explicitly not only legal but mandatory.
Right, I'm going to show that bill. All right, hold on. I'm going to show that. Keep talking. Go ahead.
That bill made mandatory across the state for all firefighters that any paid time off that they took, and by paid time off, I'm talking about vacation time, sick time, personal leave, bereavement leave, injured on duty, any mechanism that paid them where they didn't actually work the shift. This law says that time that they work must be counted towards their regular hours worked for the purposes of calculating overtime.
Yep, and here's the actual text. For the purposes of this section, hours worked, your standard shift, shall include all paid leave. Now again, if you're watching, think about this in your job. Your paid leave, the time you're paid for not working, is now classified as hours worked. So not working now equals worked. Again, only in the land of make-believe can not working count as work. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and I can even quantify this for you. In Hummel's story, there was a firefighter who took all of his shifts off for vacation in 1 week. And then he worked 4 shifts of overtime. Those overtime shifts, had they been paid at regular time instead of time and a half, which in the real world, that's what should have happened, that firefighter was paid over $850 extra that week because of this particular situation. right? Now you can see how you get to $500,000 pretty quickly. That was $800 in one 8-day week for one single firefighter. And there was another example where the firefighter hauled in about over $600. You know, they have very different pay rates for different job classifications. But, you know, it's fundamentally wrong. You don't see that anywhere in the real world. And in fact, you don't see that, I don't think, in any other contract. No, sorry, I don't think you see that in a whole lot of contracts, and you certainly don't see that in a whole lot of other public sector areas, right? And then what Representative Edwards did in this circumstance was he codified in law something that on its face is absolutely ridiculous and wrong. And in the case of Warwick, it was $500,000. They weren't even abusing this nearly as badly as East Greenwich did. So Warwick could have been on the hook for way more than $500,000 under this scheme.
All right, we know the Warwick mayor is aware of this. He knows this is codified in law. But let me ask this. Is this also, as far as you know, in the collective bargaining agreement? Because this has probably been going on before the law was passed in 2019, right?
So in Warwick, it is not in the collective bargaining agreement.
So they were just doing this, putting in false hours, false overtime, and nobody questioned it, and the city just paid out the money. Do you know for how long, for how far back this has been going on for?
I don't, but I'll tell you in Warwick, the fire department runs its own books. There are no external eyes looking at, no sets of external eyes looking at the data.
Not the city council?
Except when someone like me comes along and takes a peek, and the 2 times we've done it, we've come away with horrifying examples of a system run amok. So, all right, so let's just set this up at a high level. So, in Warwick, would you guess this was happening before the 2019 law? Yes.
Okay, so in East Greenwich, similar?
Yes.
Firefighter workers, do you know if this is with union, the union official knowledge or approval? Was there any communications that said, hey, here's a way you can rig the system and get some extra money, or were workers doing this on their own? Any idea?
No, I don't have any visibility to that, but, this was considered in Warwick a past practice, and because it was not negotiated in the contract, Warwick's mayor had the legal ability to cancel this past practice with 30 days notice. And I believe Warwick's mayor would have canceled this, except for the state law that we stumbled into, which said, nope, you have to do it this way.
And we won't, well, you can mention the person if you want, but one prominent Rhode Islander directly involved in the East Greenwich situation joked that this law was all your fault, and I'm joking on that, and because here's the way the game works. These government unions, when the cities and towns try to exert their management authority and try to do something on behalf of the taxpayers that maybe the unions don't like, the unions immediately go running up to their crony, insider, corrupt friends in the General Assembly, and they pass some law to stop the municipalities from implementing these taxpayer-saving programs. Isn't that exactly what happened here? When you started your investigation into East Greenwich?
Yep, we looked at East Greenwich. We discovered the abuse. I was told by one of the key players in East Greenwich that as a result of documenting and bringing to light the situation, that was when the push was made to begin putting in place this law to make that practice a statewide practice codified in state law.
So we showed you the state law. I'm going to share the bill again with you, and you can see here that John Edwards was the only sponsor of this. So one guy can basically set it up under law in our state for every fire department and every city and town and fire district to rip off taxpayers.
It's amazing. I have talked to legislators on both sides of the aisle, and they are all scared to death of labor in general, but the firefighters union in particular, wholly unwilling to take any action that labor and more importantly the firefighters would take exception to, and a complete abdication of their responsibility to protect the taxpayer first and foremost. They're not there at all in their actions, and it's disgusting.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, and disgustingly, but justifiably so, are they concerned? Because look what they did in East Greenwich. Susie Yankee, the now chairwoman of the GOP, was then president of the town council. I think they had a Republican majority. They exposed, with your help and others, some of these abuses going on with the fire department in East Greenwich.
Yeah.
And in the 2018, was it the 2018 election? Yeah. In the 2018 election, the firefighters invested, I don't know how many tens or hundreds of $1,000s into East Greenwich, and they knocked every one of them out.
Yep.
And now it's a progressive left-run town council who will do anything the firefighter unions say. But you're saying the problem's deeper than that. Even up at Smith Hill, every lawmaker is afraid that they might be next on the firefighters' target list. Right?
I think 62 legislators voted to approve this bill that codified in law this outrageous scenario.
Well, let's take a look at that real quick, all right, Ken?
Sure.
I actually can bring that right up here. So here's a little tool we have. So here in the House, where John Edwards started with the bill, all right, let's sort. You can see every Republican voted no and one Democrat voted no. Don't know why Lauren Carson would have voted no. And everyone else, oh, no, there was a Republican. Jack Lyle, yeah, he was a union-loving Republican. Yeah, he voted yes. Everyone else voted for it. In the Senate, and let's look here, it passed 28-6, and again, you did actually have some Democrats vote no on that. Interesting. Nesselbush, Raptakis, and McKinney. And you did have, let's see, Algier. Imagine that, the minority leader of the Senate, and Thomas Paolino, very surprising, also Republicans voted yes for this bill. But your claim is that well, let's go to this next. Now, there's a bill this year. Let's go back and share the screen again. The bill this year put up by some brave reps, Patricia Morgan and George Nardone, to actually strike that language from the law. And there it is. There, that sentence that allowed all paid leave.
Yep.
That's the proposal. Do you know if that bill is getting any attention at all by Speaker of the House Joseph Shekarchi?
So I've got to imagine that the pressure is increasing. The more that people learn about this, and you have to realize that the disclosure that this state law is sitting behind all of this literally just came out a few hours ago today.
Right.
So give it some time to percolate.
This literally is breaking news right now.
It's breaking news. There is bigger news than this that's coming that speaks to this same issue.
What?
Bigger stuff coming. I can't tell you what it is yet.
There's more on this issue.
On this issue, not fire related.
So potential, can I think I'll guess it, potential overtime abuse by other government unions.
Yep.
Something like that. All right, we will wait. All right, now, John Edwards says he didn't realize that clause was put in at the end of his overtime bill. The other part of the bill set the standard for what could be determined maximum overtime at 42 hours, which was still very much pro-union, but nobody nobody, he says he didn't realize that this paid leave would be counted as work phrase was in the bill. Are you buying that?
Well, his name's on the bill. If you don't know what's in your own bill, you have a pretty serious issue that, you know, you got to get on. Well, so all right, it's in there. Does he want to fix it?
Yeah, okay, good. I see, and he's quoted in the article today by Hummel Report, and I don't, I can't remember exactly what he was quoted as saying. I'm trying to find it, but also quoted in there was Speaker of the House Shekarchi, and asked if he would support Morgan's bill to eliminate this provision. He said he would if the mayor of Warwick, Bocosi, requested it and the city council passed a resolution. So what are we going to do to get the city council to pass a resolution?
We're working on that right now.
Okay. Speaker of the House Shekarchi said he'd support eliminating that clause. That's surprising to me.
It's one thing to take that clause out. It doesn't actually put the problem to bed. I would personally submit a very different bill. The bill I would submit would make illegal the counting of any paid leave of any kind, sick time, vacation time, personal leave, bereavement, whatever, that it may not be used to count towards regular time worked for any Rhode Island governmental employee, municipal or state. That's the law. That's the law that we should have, because the problem, you have to trust me on this right now, the problem is bigger than the firefighters, and it's incredibly unfair and wasteful that we're paying overtime to a group of governmental employees paid by taxpayer dollars who are not working their regular shifts but hauling in overtime. It's fundamentally wrong, and that practice should be blown out of the water by the General Assembly. That's the right way to fix this.
I agree. As our viewers may know, you know, we did a major report 2 years ago that showed a lot of excesses in union collective bargaining contracts. And in case after case, we pointed out how union workers are being paid for not working, whether it's, everything from, it's all almost, the list was a page long of all the ways that, and this is just one of them, that having not work count for work. And so this is a slightly different take on that. We didn't uncover this issue specifically, and I thank you for your great work, but we showed so many other ways. Now, this particular law, so I want to clarify what you're saying here. This particular law is codified only for firefighters, right?
Correct.
But you're saying, like we said earlier, that even before the law passed, that they were, even if it was or wasn't in a collective bargaining agreement, that government union workers or union officials were abusing, were putting in basically these false overtime, these phony overtime claims. And you're saying that in the law or not, in collective bargaining agreements or not, that many, many other government unions, perhaps even in a much bigger way, are also abusing their privileges by abusing these overtime provisions.
Yep.
So you're looking for a law to ban this practice, this corrupt taxpayer ripoff practice on a statewide basis for all government workers, and I assume for statewide and municipal workers.
Correct, municipal and state. Yep.
Any idea? All right. Well, we're gonna have to raise some attention, get Rep. Morgan and Rep. Nardone on, talk about what they're doing, what they're hearing. Are you aware of any lawmaker who is interested in moving that kind of legislation?
So I have not yet had any legislator at in the General Assembly reach out to me to discuss any of these findings.
All right. If anyone's watching today, I'm sure, Ken, you have some suggested language?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I tweeted it out earlier.
All right. Ken Block, you do a great job. Boy, this is, all the welfare fraud you do, now you're finding overtime fraud right under our noses. Nobody's saying a word about it until now. Thanks to you and Jim Hummel Thanks for coming on our show, and will you promise to come back once you break the next piece of big news?
I will, and I want to leave you with this thought. $500,000 in Warwick. It's possible that this scheme is worth more than $10 million statewide, just for the firefighters.
Just for firefighters?
Yep.
And yet you're saying that something even bigger may be happening with non-firefighter government union employees.
Stay tuned.
Wow. Ken Block, Watchdog, Rhode Island. Thanks to you and Jim Hummel.
Thanks, Mike.
Good day. What a cesspool, folks. What a cesspool. Do you really think that you are the most important person when it comes to who government is representing? Are they representing you, blue collar, white collar, hardworking taxpayers who just want to work, have some pride, raise your family, run your business, live a life, and just tell the government to leave us the hell alone and quit charging me extra taxes, especially when you see a government that is almost 100% catering to special interest unions. I mean, I want you to think about this. Corrupt practices were discovered in East Greenwich 3 or 4 years ago. Management in East Greenwich went to take action against these union abuses. And these corrupt, obviously corrupt. Does anybody think what you just heard here is not corrupt? When management went to take action against these corrupt union abuses, the unions go running to their friends in General Assembly to tie the hands of management and to stop them from implementing common sense, cost-saving, taxpayer-friendly policies. Just think about that for a second. Let that percolate in your brain. If you have a woke brain, you don't have a brain that it's percolating in. But for those of you who still have some critical thinking left, let that sink in. Corrupt practices exposed, but instead of being stopped, they're codified into law. This is what's happened with the election. Corrupt election processes, unconstitutional election processes exposed after being illegally implemented last year, and now there's a bill to codify those corrupt practices into law. Why? Because they help some special interest group. Government unions, progressive left, the ruling class party. You and me are the last people that our elected officials think about or are concerned about. Whether it's out of fear, as Ken Block said, fear of being thrown out of office, whether they agree with the union agenda or the political progressive agenda, whether they're just pure insider cronies, you and me are the last people these government officials are concerned with. And you know, it's like what we're seeing on the border nationally, that the left and the progressives and a certain party are more concerned with the rights and welfare of illegal immigrants into our country than they are with you or me, the legal citizens and residents of this country. It's really astounding. I mean, this is what the woke agenda is. It's just astounding in instance after instance after instance. So yeah, I think we're going to need to start a little crusade here. Will you join me? We'll get a little. I'm going to talk to our team, see if we get a little petition going to demand that this unpaid leave not be counted as work hours. It would never happen in the private sector. It would never happen for you or me. And we have nothing against firefighters and police and whoever else, SEIU. We don't think they should be government unionized, but we respect their work. But it's the unions, the union bosses. I'm sure it's the union bosses pushing this, and I am disappointed in any individual. I have to say this: while we generally respect our first responders, in this case, if you're an individual firefighter, if you're an individual government worker, and you knowingly committed this phony overtime timesheet, this overtime fraud, knowingly did it to enrich yourself at the expense of taxpayers, I'm disappointed in you. It's legal now, believe it or not, but I'm still disappointed in you. Just because it's legal doesn't make it right, and doesn't make it something that taxpayers should continue to put up with. Just unbelievable what we see going on. And that's what I talked about earlier. It's amazing how these woke tribal attitudes dominate everything in government, in our culture, and in so many parts of the media. You're not going to get any of that woke stuff here, other than us criticizing it. All right, I've said enough. I don't want to say any more. I'll get in trouble. Like Joe Biden says, if I say any more, I'll get in trouble. Only with myself, not with my handlers. I don't have handlers like Joe Biden does. Tomorrow, Dr. Andrew Bostom. Now they're going to be pushing vaccines on 12 to 15-year-olds. The pressure is going to be high. The ignorance level of many parents is high. I was listening to the radio today. It's not a clear-cut case. There's a debate going on. You and your doctor and your parents and your children have to mutually decide together what's in your best interest. But the misrepresentation by government officials, by many advocates, is not supported by the science. We're going to share some of that science tomorrow with Dr. Andrew Bostom. So we hope you'll tune in the Dugout. I'll be back into normal wear tomorrow. Thanks for putting up with my garb. I'm disappointed our guest wasn't able to make it today from the Worcester Red Sox. Perhaps we'll have him on at another time. But for Mike Stenhouse, I don't know if I hit a home run today with this show, but here's my bat. There's my. How many guys get a signature engraved on the bat? Pretty cool, huh? I think it's the only one I have left. I think I've given the rest away. But anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you next game. For In the Dugout, Mike Stenhouse.